Hello there, friends. This is Spencer Michaud, and today we're going to be talking about the full moon in Scorpio 3. We're going to be breaking down all of the pieces of the Scorpio moon. We're going to be talking about the sun in Taurus 3, and then the moon opposing it in the third decan of Scorpio. We're going to be talking about Mars hosting the moon, squaring that moon from Leo, second decan of Leo. We're going to talk a little bit about a square between Mercury and Pluto during this full moon, and just kind of break down the astrology of the upcoming week or so here, and the week following the full moon, how it is all going to unfold. So thank you so much for joining me here today. If you're here, let me know. Put something in the chat. Let me know where you're stopping in from. It's always nice to see all my friends coming in from various parts of the world. I want to welcome some of you here today. Rachel Fletcher is here. What's up, Rachel? Rachel says good morning from Roanoke, Virginia. Rachel is always a nice. Rachel, you're such a Taurus. You're always so consistent about coming to our live streams. I really appreciate that, friend. That's one of the beauties of Taurus season is kind of that consistency, and just sometimes the best ability, they say in sports, is availability, of being able to come up and show up every week is just it's so wonderful. Thank you so much for your support. Steven is here. What's up, Steven? Hello, happy Friday. Yay, May is here. Yes, it is May. So happy Beltane, maybe one day late, but hopefully everyone is having a nice auspicious beginning to mid-spring, if you will. Kai is here. What's up, Reverend Kai? Nice to see you. Good morning from Kansas. Nice to see you, my friend. Hope that you're doing well there in the heartland as well. Let's see. Yes, happy Taurus season, Stephen. Absolutely. Taurus season is a great season. I'm a fan, and I love all the flowering trees. I love the hopefulness of spring. I just got done watching what I affectionately dub football Christmas, the NFL draft, which is just all about potential and about hope springing eternal. I'm working in my garden. I've been doing a lot of hard work in the garden, but I think it's all going to be worth it. I think that when you have something that you're motivated to do and that you're looking towards the future for future prosperity, the work becomes worth it. And I think that's Taurus season in a nutshell. There's beauty all around us. There's work to be done if you want to multiply your abundance. But I think it's a good balance, right? Taurus season is all about the balance between work and play, and hopefully we'll be able to move forward with that. Tarja is here. What's up, Tarja? Hello, moi, my Finnish friends. Tarja says we have stormy weather in Finland. I may lose power and connections. Oh my goodness, Tarja. Well, I hope that the thunder gods are kind and benevolent to you in this beautiful Friday evening over in Finland. Love all my Finnish friends. Thank you so much for stopping in, Tarja and Susanna and the other Tarja. We've got all the Tarjas and all my friends from Finland. I love it. All right, friends. Thank you so much for stopping in here. So we're talking about full moon in Scorpio 3. Again, we're going to break down all the details associated with that. But first, just a couple announcements. So you can find me over at spencermichaud.com. I, of course, am a professional astrologer, and I do these weekly live streams each week, usually on Friday afternoons. The time does change depending on where Mars is in the chart in particular, but we've been doing some early shows here. But generally, we're here Friday afternoons or evenings if you're in Europe. And you can find me over at spencermichaud.com if you'd like to book a reading. We talk a lot about the decans and fixed stars. I do incorporate those techniques into my readings. You can click on the book now to schedule a Mythos reading if you want to know all about your natal chart and all about the natal promise that you have from the stars. You can also purchase a Kairos reading, which we'll talk about Kairos today. Kairos is the opportune moment. So a Kairos reading is all about divine timing and like what you might expect for the next few months ahead if you want to get a jump and prepare yourself for what fate might have in store for you. I also do astrological tutoring and have a number of classes that I'm offering. One of those classes is going to be on June the 14th. We are doing a dignity and devotion series on the 7 traditional planets, and we're going to be doing Jupiter next. And by we, I mean my beautiful partner, Tanya Andrews of Third Coast Mojo. So we're going to be talking all about the myths associated with Zeus, aka Jupiter, and all of the ways to remediate Jupiter within the chart. It's going to be a fun one. It's the greater benefic. Jupiter will be in its exaltation in Cancer by the time we get to this webinar. So it should be a really great time. We're going to talk about how to create a ritual practice, how to elect for Jupiter elections, and how to create a devotional practice if you are into that as well. So join us on Saturday, June the 14th. We've also got Saturn coming up as the last in our series. That's going to be on August the 9th, and that's available to be signed up for as well if you want to just get the jump ahead on that. You can find Tanya over on Etsy at Third Coast Mojo. She has all sorts of wonderful magically elected products here, beautifully crafted, as you can see with this blockbuster offering, which is a Mars and Capricorn offering that helps you break through any obstacles. I know that she and I have been utilizing this type of materia to break through the obstacles in our yard. we have a corner of our yard that has been neglected and kind of abused for many decades before we purchased the home. And there was all sorts of junk in there. And by junk, I mean really heavy concrete blocks that people had dumped there that was like an old foundation. We've been digging out a giant pile of that. And this blockbuster has really been helping us to kind of dig in and see it through. So all sorts of wonderfully magically elected products over on Third Coast Mojo on Etsy. So please go and support her over there. You also can sign up for the newsletter if you want to know when I'm going live, if you want to know when new classes are going to be offered, if you'd like some updates on what's going on in the sky. You can also get a 10% discount on everything that I offer by signing up for the newsletter. Just click on that newsletter link at spencermichaud.com and you can sign up that way. And then finally, if you want to support the channel here today, you can purchase a super chat while I'm live on YouTube with a little $ in the chat, or you can purchase a super thanks after the fact, or you can go to buymeacoffee.com and support the channel that way. All of your support really is extremely helpful to helping me keep the lights on and continue to do this work. It is time consuming and expensive to do this work. There's a lot of software and equipment that goes into it. There's reference material. All of that is helped out by all of your support, and I couldn't do it without you. So thank you so much for being part of this community. All right. So let's talk more about this full moon. See if we've got some more friends stopping in. Oh, hey there, Claire. Claire Moon is here. How you doing? The Lightning Light Astrology. Nice to see you, my friend. Hope things are going well for you in Wisconsin, if you're still hanging out in Wisconsin, I think. Claire's an excellent astrologer and quite the pharmacist, I hear, as well. So, and I mean that literally, not like metaphorically. It's like she's literally a pharmacist. But anyway, I digress. Nice to see you, Claire. Hope you're doing well, my friend, and everything's going well your way. Okay, so we're talking full moon in Scorpio 3 here. And this is going to be happening. I'll bring the chart up and we'll just get our bearings and we'll see where we're at with all of this. We'll get this screen shared here and bring up the chart. There you go. You could see that full moon in Scorpio. May 12th, a Monday, full moon on Monday. Doesn't quite work with the Duran Duran song, but you get the idea. You could fudge a few words here. Full moon on Monday, right? 12:55 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Make the appropriate adjustment for your time zone. And we've got a number of things going on. We've got the sun in Taurus 3 here, making an application to Uranus. We, of course, have the moon in the third decan of Scorpio. We'll talk all about those two decans in a minute here. We have Mercury co-present with the sun making a square to Pluto. So that is a pretty prominent feature in this full moon. Mercury squaring Pluto, oftentimes speaking towards intensity of thought, diving into the depths, uncovering a secret. You know, with Mercury in the first decan of Taurus squaring Pluto, we may uncover some information about our resources, about our financial situation, and it could be a little bit, it might be a little bit unsettling at first, right? That decan of Taurus often speaks towards feeling a little bit insecure about our resources, a little bit worried about our future. But the good news is that Mercury has decanic dignity there. So the remediation for feeling a little bit insecure about your physical form, resources, etc., is kind of making a plan. Really taking stock of what you have, what you need, and then making a plan for working the metaphorical or literal fields of your life to create future abundance. The good news about having that experience in Taurus season is that there is an opportunity to create fertility or to utilize the timing of the season to create fertility. And that's not always true. Sometimes when we run across some of these conditions of lack, like in the late fall or the winter, our moment may have passed. So we'll talk about the opportune moment today and what that might mean. But there may be some things that are a little bit outside of our control. Like sometimes when we have different political things happening in the world, that may cause us to make different types of plans for our security. So things to consider right away with this. Let's see. So we've got the Mercury-Pluto square is a prominent feature. We have, so let's I'll just break this down. So we've talked about Mercury-Pluto a little bit. We've got Venus trining Mars in this chart within 3 degrees, separating from Neptune. So that is one positive, potentially, is we've got a really fiery trine between Venus trying to help a little bit the host of the moon. The benefics, there aren't any benefic aspects to the moon itself or to the sun itself. So both benefics are in a condition called aversion, which means that they can't see or have an open line of communication to the full moon. But we may have this through the back channels, through like Venus may be trying to help Mars, which is the host of the moon. So you have to think about a natal chart as a series of relationships and interconnectedness within it. We're going to talk about this a lot more moving forward, I think, this summer, is how do we see the chart as an ecosystem? How do we look at astrology in terms of biomimicry and seeing how this as above, so below? I think this is one of the things this is the axioms that you see in philosophical circles, especially associated with astrology, as above, so below. So the relationships that we see in the sky can be reflected in some of the relationships we see down on the earth, in relationship to nature, etc. So oftentimes, even if we don't have a visible direct connection, we have ones that are sort of happening underground, like mycelial networks. You'd be amazed when you start to dive into the entanglements of life, how much support plants have for one another, how much each plant and each animal, each insect, how important each of their roles is, even if we consider them a nuisance, like a fly or a mosquito. They all play their interconnected roles. So Venus is going to be kind of helping this full moon in an indirect sort of way. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move forward. Of course, we've got the Sun in Taurus 3. We will break that down. Hosted by Venus in Aries in aversion. And then the moon is also on a fixed star called Unukalhai, High, which is the heart of the serpent. We'll talk about that. We're going to have some themes associated with shedding our skin, with understanding when the right moment has arrived or has passed. I think this is one thing that this full moon is going to reflect, is we can't necessarily do everything. Number one, that's what Jupiter in Gemini 3 is teaching us. And some things have a particular timing, set of timing circumstances that when they're passed, it's hard to capture them again. My partner and I have been experiencing this with the number of outdoor projects we've been attempting to do, which were admittedly slightly overambitious. We've been trying to plant a number of fruit trees and nut-bearing trees, like a food forest, and we didn't quite anticipate the amount of site prep that we were going to have to do. And in addition to that, we were planning on doing we purchased some raised bed material, and we were going to make 4 raised beds, 8x4 raised beds, and plant seeds and do all these things. The tree project, since it has been more labor intensive, has taken away time from seed starting, building raised beds, etc., to the point where we've potentially missed a window for starting tomato plants indoors. Like if we want to start tomatoes, for example, we may have to purchase starts that have had a good head start so that they will be able to ripen at the proper time because of the length of our growing season in the Midwest of the United States. So this isn't just a small example, a practical example of how if you miss your opportune moment, you may not be able to get it back. Like I can't go back in time and plant a tomato seed indoors, even though I should have. We were just kind of overwhelmed with things. And there may have to be a point of acceptance that you've missed the moment for that particular project. Now, it's not the end of the world. The good news in our circumstance is that we have this wonderful other project that we're getting much closer to completing. You know, we've got all the trees that came in the mail. We ordered them, and we have these little baby trees. The site is getting much closer to being ready to be planted and inseminated with these new trees. And that's going to feel really good. And I think that when you're able to complete one project, then that opens your mind up for something else. And the other thing I will say about that too is that sometimes even when you miss your Kairos moment in one season, that doesn't mean that that project is dead. It means that it may lie dormant for a period of time. And so if we come back to the example I've been utilizing, if we get the trees in place, which is like infrastructure, right? This is planting infrastructure, building up all the things that are going to last for years into the future. We still have the raised bed materials that we could build after the tree project is done. And maybe we don't plant all of the things that we had planned this year. Maybe we don't have all our seeds started. We could still do quite a few things at the beginning of May, but maybe not everything that we had planned. But by next year, then that project, all that infrastructure will be in place, and then we will be able to see maybe a fuller flourishing of that particular project. So I think this is a long-winded way of saying, if you've missed your Kairos moment, your opportune moment, you just might have to wait again for another cycle. It doesn't mean that you'll never have the opportunity again. It just means that the cycle has to come back around once again. Same thing for a tree. We have a bigger tree that we wanted to move. And generally when you're moving an adult tree, or an adolescent tree in this case, you don't want to move it while the buds are breaking. You want to move it before the buds have started to pop out. And we sort of missed our timing on that one as well. So we may have to wait until maybe the fall when the tree starts to become more dormant to move it, or in the beginning of next spring. And this is just kind of how things go. We are working within limitations of time and space when we are trying to achieve things. And Taurus season is a season where we're trying to achieve practical things. So this full moon is helping us to understand which things we can achieve, which things may have missed our moment, and then to just let it go gracefully, to retreat gracefully if we need to do so. That is always one of the most difficult challenges in our lives, is accepting that we have limitations. Our spirits generally feel, I think from a spiritual perspective, there is much less of a sense of limitation, although there can be arguments to that. Spiritually, we can see all the possibilities. If we have intuition, spiritual vision, etc., we can see what things could be. This is a unique, I don't know if it's unique, but it is a human characteristic of being able to dream and see what things could be off into the future, delayed gratification. But then we run into the physical limitations of time, space, resources, the limitations of our bodies. This is one thing we've been really learning as we've gone through our own physical versus spiritual like project reconciliation. We got really sick in the midst of doing this hard labor outside. When we first started digging through the old pile, we weren't wearing like any masks or anything like that, and I think that we were breathing in a lot of old dust and mold and things like that. There was also a lot of compost in that area. We were just breathing in stuff and pushing our bodies to their absolute limits. And then our body said no more for like a week. You know, it was like, okay, like you can't continue to push yourself like this or you will perish. Like, it felt like we were going to perish. But I think that when you do that, you rest and then you come back. This is how you do Taurus season well. Like the sun right now, as I'm recording this, is in Taurus 2, which is all about having a rhythm, a routine, working just enough to keep things moving forward, and then making sure you're resting and playing, etc. Yesterday, Tanya and I went out and started moving more dirt. We just got a huge pile of dirt to replace all the concrete that came out of this space that we're trying to plant. And we went out there in the time that we had after we had done both of our 9-to-5 jobs, and we moved dirt for an hour and a half. And we wanted to do more, but it looked like it was going to start to rain and it was getting dark, and we stopped. And then we will probably go out there this evening and revisit it once again, rather than having to push ourselves for like 10 hours one day beyond what is physically comfortable. So doing just enough, resting, and then coming back at it again. Those are the things that lead to success over time. That consistency is what can lead you to positive outcomes rather than trying to just burn yourself out. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about Taurus 3 in this full moon. And I want to bring up, because it is a prominent player. So the sun often shows us where we have a conscious spotlight. The moon is the manifestation part. The moon says, this is the body that the light of the sun is going to collect into, the container for that impetus, you could say. And the impetus, the goal, the conscious awareness is that in Taurus 3, we have to humble ourselves in the face of nature. Taurus 3 is often a decan that speaks towards, well, you had all the plans in the world. Taurus 1, you made plans. You did everything that you could do consistently in Taurus 2. And then even with that, there may be some things that were outside of your control. Sometimes the weather shifts. Sometimes there's a storm. Sometimes there's a blight. Sometimes there's pests and you have to go through and fix something. Maybe you did something too rashly and you have to go back and fix it. And you have to repent, I guess, is the more, the words that are used in the Decanic literature. Repentant prayer, surrendering to the process. Oftentimes you learn when you get closer to the earth that, well, this is something that I think should be common sense, but isn't always, because of our hubris, because of our human tendency to think that we have control over everything at all times. But what you learn when you start working with the earth is that you can do everything right, quote unquote, and you can still have weather that's too hot, weather that's too cold, too wet, too dry. You can have pests that come in, and you can have a groundhog, for example, come in. You could prepare the site, remove all the things, and you could have a groundhog come in and just gnaw those little baby trees like right to the ground. Now, I've had that happen before in the past. So I'm going to make preparations so that that doesn't happen. Like protect them with a little bit of a barrier, like a little mini fence around them, because I've lived that pain before. I've learned from that experience. So this is another thing about Taurus 3 is sometimes we learn, hopefully we can learn from our experiences and we can anticipate as much as possible challenges that might happen into the future and try to guard against them through insurance mechanisms. Like my insurance mechanism against my baby tree not getting eaten by a rabbit or a groundhog is to put a physical barrier around that tree. A way to prepare for the future so that you don't find yourself in a difficult spot is to purchase insurance for your vehicle or for your home. These are all themes that we may be thinking about. And with the sun conjoining Uranus, there may be some unexpected solutions. There may be some unexpected problems that come up that you couldn't have anticipated. And that's just life sometimes. And sometimes you have to roll with those unexpected challenges. Okay. Yes, Mistel. What's up, Mistel? Shambliss, nice to see you. Says, LOL. Yes, I've had squirrels eat my little pecan trees. It's so heartbreaking, isn't it, Mistel? You do all the work. You pick out the trees, you pick out the space, you prep the soil, you mulch all around it, and then some animal destroys all that work in like an afternoon. It is very heartbreaking. I will say this. As a native pollinator habitat gardener, one of the things I've had to come to terms with is if things are eating your plants, that means you're probably at least doing something right. Because part of the motivation for doing that is to create habitat for the ecosystem. But if we're doing this is always the balance that you have to strike, I think, when you're someone who wants to create native habitat, but also when you're trying to feed your family, is how do you live in harmony with those creatures that are also trying to feed themselves and their family. So I've seen some really innovative solutions. Like, for example, there is a groundhog on Instagram. I can't remember his name. Chunk, I think is his name, which is appropriate, where this gardener was growing food and he was trying to, create abundance, and this groundhog kept coming in and eating everything. And eventually he just surrendered to that and said, I'm going to have this little section for the groundhogs. I'm just going to I'm going to grow stuff and let you eat stuff and then film it. And it turned into this sensation. It's a beautiful example of kind of almost like natural tithing, right? Like, yes, you want to grow things, but you're tithing 10% of that to the groundhogs. And I'm trying to come more into alignment with that type of thinking rather than getting upset about it. Now, when it comes to trees, I think those are things that you want to protect those so that they grow, and then they can become much more abundant if you let them grow. They can feed all sorts of wildlife if you protect them when they're small. So those are the balances that we've had to kind of navigate. Yes, yes. Miss Stell says yes. I'm sure they were yummy. Absolutely. Yeah. So I think that there is a little bit of kind of coming into alignment with the Tao, going with the flow when you're doing things like this. But it's natural to be frustrated when you see your work being destroyed by natural forces. But again, I think that instead of going to war with nature, which is often a losing proposition, the animals lose. Oftentimes the soil loses because we're putting all sorts of like toxic chemicals and dangerous things into it. And we lose because we're breathing and eating those things as well. And we have stress. So if you try to work in alignment with these cycles, anticipating and understanding that we don't have to be so human-centric. That's an important concept that I think human beings really have a lot of problems with, is we center ourselves as the center of our universes. And when we start to decentralize our place within it, I think that we can start feeling much more in alignment with the all that is and become stewards of the land rather than to try to dominate it. Steven says, I had a walnut tree in my parents' yard. The squirrels ate them too. Yeah, and if you have an adult walnut tree, that tree produces so many walnuts that there are enough to share. When we are truly accepting and co-creating with nature, it can provide so much abundance. When we try to exploit our mother, basically, that's when we have problems. So again, walnuts are great food for squirrels. You can have 5 buckets of walnuts from a black walnut in my area, and plenty of leftover for the squirrels to eat too. We're planting hazelnuts, and we have hazelnut bushes we're putting in, as well as service berries. And I'm sure that we are probably going to lose a number of service berries to the birds, etc., which is fine. That's part of the reason they're going there. I'm sure that the squirrels are going to eat a number of the hazelnuts. They're probably more than we can process in one season. That's fine. I'm okay with sharing. So this is if you go in with that attitude, the stress, that's what really kills you. The acceptance is what, I think sustains us. Kai says, working out in the garden while listening this morning. You're speaking so much truth. Oh, thank you, Kai. I'm so happy that you're working in the garden and listening to this at the same time. That is the ultimate, I think, way to experience, especially with this full moon. I use garden metaphors a lot and nature metaphors a lot because that's, quite frankly, that's my interest. Those are the things I'm interested in. Those are the things that are my practical lived experiences right now, and I'm so happy that you're sharing in that experience as well, Kai. You'll have to let me know what you're planting this year. Steven says their walnut tree had to be cut down. Yeah, sometimes that happens. Sometimes you have to make room for other things, and that's part of gardening and nature as well, is releasing forms that aren't serving us anymore. That's another theme of the Scorpio third decan full moon, is there will be some forms that we can no longer keep living. One example of this is that I'm going to plant some pawpaw trees. Pawpaws, if you're not familiar with pawpaws, they're like the bananas of the Midwest or the East, I guess, because Rachel was saying that she has pawpaws out in Virginia too. I wasn't aware of their range, but they're like kind of this almost like tropical-esque fruit, and you can make ice cream and everything from it. And but to create room for those pawpaw trees, we've got some boxwoods that aren't really doing much. They're not native. They do create evergreen foliage throughout the year, which is nice and is giving me pause. But they're not really contributing to the ecosystem the same way that the pawpaw trees would. So they have to go. We just don't have room to keep all of it. And the same is true when we are going through with forest management. I was reading a story about something in a situation in Kalamazoo this morning. Kalamazoo is a city that's a couple hours west of us in Michigan. And some environmentalists had been protesting. This one really bothered me a little bit. There is a nature preserve in Kalamazoo where they're doing forest management, where they're creating a path through the forest for people to be able to enjoy that nature space. They're removing some of the underbrush so that they can preserve the old growth oaks that are in that space. They're actually doing it to manage and preserve the oldest trees. And somebody went and misinterpreted what they were doing and vandalized all of the equipment and some of the actual trees, which is insane to me. So it was a misunderstanding, I think, on some level. But the misunderstanding is that we have to save every piece of something to create the long-term benefit. That's not how nature works. Nature eliminates some things sometimes. Things are born, things die. Sometimes things are removed. Sometimes there is fire. Sometimes you have a forest fire that actually clears space for more abundant fertility in the future. And this is something that we really need a strong lesson on with Scorpio in particular, is that we have to return things to the earth. We have to let go of forms at the appropriate time so that it can provide future sustenance for future life. I know that we try to live in this moment so much, and we're so afraid of loss in this culture. But accepting loss will actually keep a cycle healthier, creating space. I think Scorpio is a lot about space. This full moon may be a lot about space. How do we create space in our life so that we don't have things so overcrowded? Young gardeners will go out and they will completely overplant. They're like, oh, if 3 tomato plants in a 4x8 space are good, how about 20? that was my thinking when I first started gardening. Oh, more plants, more tomatoes. That's not the way it works. If you have too many plants in one small space, they don't produce as well as if you put less. Sometimes less is more. And Scorpio can show us that. Sometimes less is more, right? Sometimes if you leave space, if you eliminate a form that is no longer serving you, that can create more abundance in the future. Yeah, Miss Stell, we do need our little animal friends, absolutely. Yeah, and we are just trying to survive just like they are. You know, every creature, every plant, everything on this planet is just trying to do. We're really not that different from our little animal friends. We all have our families, we all have our desires, we all have our hungers, we all have our communities, and I think that respecting that type of consciousness is not exclusively human is important. Steven says, when I lived and drove in the suburbs, if I saw a squirrel crossing the road, I would step on the brake. Yes, I brake for squirrels. Well, I love that, Steven. You just have to be careful that we're not creating more accidents when we do that. But I understand the impulse, and I have braked for a number of animals in my time. I've even pulled over. I've seen animals that were hit, and like I pulled over, and I was just like trying to help them and things like that. But you know, witnessing death is really interesting too. I've witnessed a lot of animals on the precipice of passing over, and sometimes what you realize in that moment that there's nothing you can do for them in that moment except for just be with them and witness them. I've had a number of squirrels in particular that have been crossing over, and I just sat with them, and I don't know if I feel emotional just talking about it, but just was like, you know, just trying to help keep them calm and like kind of trying to speak to them as gently as possible. And you can see the life kind of like leaving their eyes, and it's a really remarkable experience. But yeah, part of life, part of the difficult part of life sometimes, but also it can be beautiful in its own way. Also, this decan of Scorpio that this full moon is in is Venus ruled. So this could also help us to understand the beauty of decay, the beauty of letting go, the beauty of death, the beauty of saying, hey, the time has passed here. The flip side of that, the negative part about that, is when we hold on too tightly and we try to glamorize a form that is no longer vital. Like, let's say that you found that squirrel that had been already hit and he was on the brink of death. If you're going and crazily trying to keep that little guy alive, that can lead to all sorts of negative outcomes, potentially for you or for even for the animal himself. And instead of doing that, if you know that he's too far gone, just accepting that and having presence. If we're losing things in our life, instead of getting more stressed about it, how can we have presence for it, right? And that doesn't mean we don't have grief. Every time that I've had that experience with an animal that was passing, especially like it's 1,000 times worse when you are with your pet that is passing. I've had I had a really difficult experience with my previous cat, Kitty Bear. She had kidney disease, and I spent about 1.5 years giving her intravenous fluids, trying to keep her alive as she was obviously disintegrating in front of my eyes. And she did pass at home, and there was a period of time where I saw her passing, and I was holding her, and I was trying to just make her as comfortable as possible. But we went out for a walk because she hadn't quite passed, and she expired when we were out in the walk. Sometimes that happens too, where sometimes pets will try to spare you that moment. But just being present for it, rather than trying to keep something alive past its time, that is a sign of maturity. And I hope, and I don't even like thinking about it, but I have two wonderful cats right now, but I hope when their time comes that I will be able to let go so that they don't suffer any longer than they need to. So trying to extend something that is whose time has come, that can lead to suffering. And that part of it can be very difficult. So a really important theme to think about at this full moon is, how do we let go when the time is right? How do we appreciate the passing of something? And how do we alleviate suffering by not holding on to it too tightly if it's inappropriate to do so? All right, let's see. Rachel says, love this wisdom. My new Time Lord Saturn takes over today. Oh my goodness. Is it your birthday, Rachel, today? Happy birthday if so. And happy solar return if it's just the solar return. Rachel says, I'm trying to live into the Lord of Time. Yeah. Saturn Time Lord years, it will test you. It will test your patience. Everything goes a little bit slower. There are some things that we have as responsibilities during these years that are not always the most fun things, but I think slow and steady wins the race. I think acceptance is a really important thing for Saturn Time Lords years, etc. I'm in the middle of a Mars Time Lord, so I'm trying to channel martial energy into the earth. Like, I'm trying to say, instead of fighting with people around me, I'm going to create something with this energy. Saturn, it says, how can we build structure? How can we build structures? There may also be things that have come to their time with Saturn. Saturn is the Lord of time, right? And it also represents endings. So those all could be part of the experience. But I wish you the best on your birthday / solar return today. Mistel breaks for squirrels. We've got a lot of squirrel breakers here. I think that if done safely, it is a humane thing to do, because roadways are real difficult. I'm a big proponent of creating those wildlife passages where sometimes they build these underground tunnels or bridges, land bridges, I guess you could say, where animals can safely cross the road. I'm really a big supporter of that, and I wish we had more of that incorporated into our landscape. Okay. So Jupiter, let's see, Stephen has the moon as a Time Lord. Okay. Rachel says, thank you, Stephen. It's tomorrow. Okay, your birthday's tomorrow, but the actual solar return is today, so I'm thinking a lot about going from Jupiter to Saturn. Yeah, that transition can be a little bit, can be fun. But I will say this, Jupiter's been in exile this year, so Jupiter hasn't been in the greatest condition. Saturn is also going to be going into its fall, so there's some things to look out for with that, but everything's got to be somewhere. And I think, as we've been learning in our Dignity and Devotion series with Tanya, I think every placement has the ability to be remediated to some degree. There might be some things that are inevitable, but there are ways to weather challenging placements and challenging dignities or challenging Time Lord years in the best possible way. Like I was just saying, like, to weather a Mars year, to get physical with it, right? To really get your hands in the dirt, to turn the weapons of war into plowshares. I mean, that's something they talk about in the Mars hymn itself, is how do you turn the weapons of war into something that can be productive. And I think that's the same thing with Saturn. There are ways to turn sadness, depression, and obstacles into wisdom and acceptance, maturity. All of those things are opportunities. So I wish you the best on this year ahead, Rachel. All right, so let's take a look at this Taurus 3, and we're going to look at the decans of Taurus here, or at least the third decan. So there is our gardener. Maybe it's me, maybe it's you, leaning on their shovel or their digging implement or their scythe or their hoe or whatever it is, looking at the crops that they've planted and contemplating their condition. You can see that there's all this green, but there's also these brown spots, and that's blight. This card was inspired by the potato famine and the potato blight of Ireland in the 1840s. I've also seen Susie Chang talk about a story of her father or stepfather who was shoveling snow, and then he leaned on his snow shovel, kind of contemplating how much more he had to do. And I can relate to that. Every time that I've gotten a sort of a progress point, then there's like 10 more steps to go. And this might be kind of a reflection point where we say, well, let's reflect on how things have been going. Let's reflect on things that went well and that things that were challenging. If there were any mistakes that we made due to rashness, and sometimes that's unavoidable. Sometimes you're under pressure of a deadline and you just have to do things quickly. But then you go back and you have to fix the mistake if you've made a mistake. One mistake that I think might be something that we might have to remediate is the place that we're digging is also a place where I think the cable and internet lines come into the house, and there's two cables. One of them is broken and the other isn't. And obviously I'm here today, so the internet still works, but we don't have cable. But if we do have it in the future, we may have to have another cable line run because we probably split one of the cable lines. So that's an example of like trying to get the work done, but maybe doing things a little hastily and then having to go back and repair whatever damage that has been created. Yeah, we got some nice happy birthdays for Rachel here. Absolutely. So themes in Taurus 3, which Book T calls the Lord of Failure, and the Book of Thoth calls the Lord of Success Unfulfilled. Kind of difficult names. Austin Coppock in 36 Faces calls it a string of prayer beads in relationship to the spirit in this decan, or daimon, the litai, the hobbled old women that follow behind 8, aka rashness, who descended from heaven to step on the heads of mortals, basically. And these hobbled old women would follow behind, offering up these repentant prayers for the rashness of 8. So a string of prayer beads is a lot about not only surrendering and in humility to forces greater than ourselves, but also making amends for mistakes that we may have made in the past as well. So themes in this decan: floods, droughts, pestilence, natural disasters, humility before nature, but also assessing and remediating our efforts. Assessing our efforts, remediating mistakes. Excuse me. And this is a Saturn-ruled decan. So if we've been talking about Rachel having a new Time Lord as Saturn, well, Saturn is a decanic ruler of Taurus 3. So think about like Saturn in Taurus, right? It is something where we're having to really work very hard to make progress, or we have to accept some things will happen and some things will not. Atonement, surrender to a higher power, faith in the process. This is the point of Taurus season where, if you think about the progression from Taurus 1, 2, and 3, you are clearing the field of all the rocks in Taurus 1, which I can speak towards with a lot of experience. Second decan of Taurus, you're actually inseminating the field. You're planting the trees. I think all of this is divine timing, because we removed probably the last of the concrete during the sun in Taurus 1. We're pretty close to putting the trees in the ground probably this weekend during Taurus 2. And then we'll have to, do all the maintenance. We'll have to let the process play out. We'll have to have patience, because the trees we got are like, I don't know, 12 to 24 inches tall, depending on the species. They're not going to bear like buckets of fruit and nuts the first year. So part of this is, how do you do the work and then let the natural processes play out? Okay. How do you have faith that the work that you've done will bear fruit in the future? The patience part of it. So questions to ask yourself about the sun in Taurus 3, which is a big part of the full moon. What results and consequences of your efforts produce? Take stock of what you've done so far. How much work is there is left, and how much further do you have to go? In our case, quite a bit, but one day at a time, right? What went wrong, and how can you learn from your mistakes? If I'm speaking from my own experience, I was probably slightly overambitious about what I could get done in one season. Now, the weather didn't quite cooperate, and there was more obstacles in the path that came up than I had anticipated. So that's where I just accept that that was out of, some of those things were out of my control. Learn from what was in my control by changing my expectations for what I can do in one season, and then moving on, right? That's how you evaluate. You say, what worked, what didn't, what can we do differently next time? What was in our control? What was out of our control? All of those things are Taurus 3 questions. Did you rush something? And can it be redone correctly? Always a good question to ask, okay? Like, there are opportunities to redo things sometimes. Sometimes you can't, but oftentimes, there is an opportunity to do that. One thing that comes to mind is our trees were delayed in delivery. We actually ordered a number of trees from Canada, and they were delayed in customs for 2.5 weeks, to the point where some of the trees had acquired some mold and had started sprouting and coming out of dormancy before they were supposed to. And now we've had to kind of like eliminate some of the mold, like make sure that everything is healthy, etc. And that's part of remediating something that was out of our control. And that's something where we are trying to make up for a mistake potentially. Can you protect what you've cultivated from blight? Again, we've been talking about working with our animal friends, our insect friends, our plant friends, rather than against them. And how can you protect what you are trying to cultivate? One way that we are trying to protect our new baby trees is by not only by putting cage barriers around them so that the groundhogs can't destroy them, but we also have a very invasive vine that is coming through our fence from a neighbor that chokes out everything. And so we've been going through and removing, it's called Fortune's Spindle. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of it, but it is an awful, awful vine that just grows on everything. And we've been eliminating that so that these little baby trees can have a chance, because they would get choked out by this vine. So that's another example of like how protecting what you are planting from a threat. Where do you need to surrender to a higher power? This is important when we're doing something physical, but also when we're doing mental work as well. For those of you who aren't gardeners or aren't working out in the yard, try to take the gardening stories as metaphors for projects that you're working on. I am a firm believer that the natural processes that we are witnessing in the world can also be 100% applied to other types of experiences that we're having. Like if you're trying to get a business off the ground, all of these concepts can be applied. You're going to have some times where there's some things out of your control. There's going to be some times where you rush something, you have to remediate a mistake. There's going to be some times where you just have to surrender to the natural process or the whims of the market, etc., the economy, all of these things. So if you think about these things in terms of what is poignant for you and your experience. What's up, Jennifer? Nice to see you. Hope you're having a wonderful afternoon. So that's Taurus 3. The other thing to think about with Taurus 3, especially as Uranus is crossing over this particular degree, this is a decan that has two fairly difficult fixed stars, Capulus and Algol. Capulus being the sword of Perseus, which speaks to the rashness of cutting through something, right? And then Algol, which is the blinking eye of Medusa. A very difficult fixed star, which can be protective. Like when we talk about protection and this and remediating mistakes and protecting against anything that would threaten our crops, Algol can be a part of that. But Algol can also speak towards keeping a tight rein on our emotions and not letting us, not having ourselves lose ourselves in our anger, in our disappointment, not losing our heads like Medusa did. So with Uranus on Algol, this could lead to some expressions of violence, of anger that are unexpected, that would be very easy to spiral out of control because sometimes when alcohol is activated, it can lead to a very, what is the right word to describe it? I would almost like a yin anger, one that is like instinctual, an instinctual anger that comes from a very unconscious place sometimes. Sometimes that can be useful. Other times that can be very difficult to subdue and to bring under control. So be careful if you are experiencing maybe something that you have to let go of, that you don't try to dig your heels in too far and get too upset or too angry about it, because that is another potential with Taurus 3 here. So we go back to our chart and we're looking at the host of the sun. Now, the host of the sun is Venus. And Venus has just changed over into Aries as I'm recording this. And it is conjoining Neptune today as I'm recording. Or it might be separating. It's very close to Neptune. But by the time we get to this full moon, it will be separating and finishing its movement through Aries 1. So Venus is in its exile in Aries, which means that it's in a place that it's not necessarily at its most comfortable. It is you trying to utilize the resources of Mars, which is a planet, that severs and separates. It is a planet often associated with anger and violence. Venus is a planet that's trying to bring things together. It's trying to harmonize things. It's generally associated with trying to create peace. So when Venus is in a sign that is associated with severing, separating, anger, violence, those are the resources that it has to work with to try to create its agenda, which is harmonization. So that is a fit that is not necessarily very comfortable. So we also see the types of things that we are attracted to with Venus placements. And in this case, we might be more attracted to working independently. That can be one of the challenges of this full moon, is that we are probably in the process of rejecting that which we are not. I've seen some really ugly stuff on social media in the last few days since Venus moved into Aries. Just some really ugly, racist confrontations. And I was thinking in my head, man, that feels like an Aries 1 type of thing, because people are rejecting something that's different than them in a violent and kind of ugly way. And that to me can be a reflection of that. And those types of things those voices have been getting louder, and they probably will continue to get louder as Saturn moves into Aries as well. We will talk about Saturn and Aries potentially next week. I'm going to have to look at the schedule here, but I think that's what we're going to do next week, is talk about Saturn and Aries and see if we can navigate that as best as possible. Now, on a lighter note, sometimes what Venus and Aries can do is it can make us a little bit impulsive about pursuing the things that we enjoy. It can say, I don't want to wait. I want to gratify this desire now. And it could lead to some rashness that may need to be remediated later. It can also lead to getting things done very quickly. Like I was thinking about some preparation for this week, and there was not as much, since Venus moved into Aries, there wasn't as much hemming and hawing about like the aesthetics. It was just like, I have to get this done. I don't have time to really like belabor every detail of this. This just has to get out the door kind of feeling, because I've got so many things on my plate, etc. So that might be the feeling too, is if you've got a lot of things on your plate, maybe it's not the time to overthink it. But I often say that we can benefit from slowing down a little bit, right? I mean, if you are practicing patience and delayed gratification, that never, in my opinion, that is never a bad thing. Yes, you can wait too long and miss your moment, but I think sometimes it's better to miss a moment and let the cycle come back around again if you're not truly ready than to force something and then find yourself in an untenable situation. That's just me. You fire signs out there could disagree. This is coming from a Cancer with a Taurus moon. so I tend to be fairly cautious. But generally, that approach has put me in better positions. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the moon in Scorpio 3. Conjoining that fixed star Urukai. So this is our moon right here, 22 degrees of Scorpio. And what we're going to do is we are going to bring up the Scorpio 3 decans slide for you. And here we see a picture of the Seven of Cups, which is the tarot card that is syncretized with this decan according to the Golden Dawn. And Book T calls this the Lord of Illusionary Success. The Book of Thoth calls it the Lord of Debauchery. Austin Cabot calls it the Crow, which is, I believe is a reference to an achemical process of putrefaction, a blackening of something, like as it decays. And the spirit in this decan, which is very important, is Kairos. And Kairos, and that's also the name of one of my timing readings, if you're curious. Kairos is the spirit or God or deity or whatever you want to call it that represents the opportune moment. Kairos had a small lock of hair on his forehead that could only be caught from the front. They said that even Zeus himself couldn't catch Kairos from behind. And that is a metaphor, a philosophical reflection on a moment that can only be caught at the right period of time. There are plenty of things like this in life, especially when you start to live seasonally. There are certain times to sow the fields. There are other times where it's too hot. You've missed your opportunity. The harvest will not be as abundant if you don't give it enough time to grow. You're not going to be sowing your seeds, most of them, in the middle of winter. There's some seeds that you can sow when it's cold and for the next season, but you won't be you'll have to wait, right? So this is a really important part of this decan. Okay, Mistel says, I'm a Cancer with a Taurus moon as well. Welcome, fellow Cancer with Taurus moon. I'm a Leo rising. I don't know if you're a Leo rising, but that would be some synchronicity. But yeah, we're pretty cautious on the whole. I would say those two signs, we're going to kind of feel out things. We're going to feel the waters. We're not going to be rushed. I think that's the other thing. We're going to do things on our own time. Like if that is one thing that people have learned the hard way with me, unfortunately, and that I've learned the hard way in life, is that I'm going to do things on my own time. No one's going to rush me, sometimes to my own detriment, right? But again, we all have different ways of approaching the world. Mistel says, Aries rising. Okay, so I get that foot on the brake and on the gas at the same time reference. Absolutely, yeah. So that might actually be a nice mitigating force for you, Mistel, is maybe having the ability to take some action without overthinking things. This is a problem I run into sometimes, is I have to weigh everything before making a decision. And oftentimes, sometimes we just need to get to it. So, but I'm glad you're here today, friend. And it's nice to meet another Cancer Taurus. So, Moon in Scorpio 3, Kairos moment, understanding when that moment is past. Now, when we have this Seven of Cups card here, right? Yeah, Mistel says, I call myself Sitting Bull. Yep, perfect example. Yep. Jennifer says, my granddaughter is a Taurus rising with Taurus moon and Virgo sun. Oh my goodness, probably also similar. When we have the Seven of Cups, it is a experience of glamorization of the form that is passing out of vitality. It is saying, hey, wouldn't it be wonderful if you could just keep this alive just a little bit longer? And that is what leads us to the things like illusionary success and debauchery. Debauchery is like doing worse and worse things to keep something alive that is no longer tenable. I always use the example of something like a vampire for this decan, because vampires are trying to keep themselves alive and others through murder, through killing things, through doing things that society deems unacceptable, right? Uh, and I also think about the movie Psycho, like Norman Bates trying to keep his mother alive in the basement after she had already passed, right? You know, glamorizing a form that is already long dead. You know, so we have to be very careful about that as well. Okay. So the beauty of decay. It's a Venus ruled decan, so there is a little bit of like a wistfulness of like trying to make something look more beautiful, like putting, you know, like dressing up the skeleton and putting makeup on it, you know, like trying to I think of morticians with this decan too, where they're trying to preserve the body on some level, and it's turning blue, but they're trying to put makeup on it and blush on the cheeks to make it look alive again, just so we can have one last look at grandpa before we put him in the ground, you know, kind of thing. That whole experience I don't understand. Like, but I digress. Fantasy and illusion, releasing attachment, right? Liberation from addiction. I've worked with a lot of clients with Scorpio 3 placements that have gone on the wheel of addiction and recovery. Sometimes addiction happens when we are trying to process old feelings, old trauma, and we don't have any other way of doing so other than like escape, right? So trying to escape pain can be associated with this too. But one thing I did notice, if you're listening and you have Scorpio 3 placements and you're like, oh man, like this is a decan. If you have prominent placements here, if you do go through that dark night of the soul, I've seen people be reborn in the most beautiful of ways with this decan. So oftentimes the recovery process is successful with this decan. So something to consider. So questions to ask yourself about the moon in this 10-degree section of Scorpio. Is what I'm experiencing reality or illusion? It's very easy to get caught up in the illusion of something here, to glamorize something that's not happening, right? Has the opportunity passed? Has the Kairos moment passed? Remember, even Zeus himself, the most powerful god on Olympus, can't catch that moment after it's passed. Which opportunities have passed? What forms are no longer vital? Being honest about it. Being honest with yourself and others about which things just aren't going to happen in this time that you have. What dark truths do you need to accept? Austin Comic talks a lot about sewers with this deck, and like people being able to go into the dark parts of life and the underground seedy types of areas of life. Like people that have benefics here, like Venus and Jupiter in particular, they're able to like go into the dark places of life and come out of it fairly unscathed, I guess you could say. Maybe not as much with Saturn. Saturn may be pretty difficult in this decan. Mars is, of course, in its own home here, but it can lead to negative outcomes if you overdo Mars here as well. So what dark truths do you need to accept? What desires need to be released? This is another part of Scorpio that's prominent. It's not just about releasing physical forms back to the earth. Sometimes it's about releasing mental and spiritual desires that we have. And we identify those desires in the first decan of Scorpio. We get nostalgic for them in the second decan, and we try to squeeze all the juice out of something by revisiting it and distilling its essence. And then in this decan, we have to discard the form. Okay. And then finally, how can you compost the past for future fertility? That's an important one. For you gardeners out there, compost is like, you know, liquid and black gold, basically. It is such a fertile substance that comes from the death of other plants and living things. So it really teaches you about the cycle of life and death. So the same thing is true with relationships in our life, with situations that we're holding on to. Those can become compost for future success, future fertility. if we would learn how to flow with those changes rather than holding on so tightly that we create suffering for ourselves and for others. So again, I will say this again, this is something that I've learned over time. I do not think that pain is unavoidable in life. There's a certain type of fate called hemermene. This is the fate that is unavoidable. There are going to be some painful moments in our life. I do tend to believe that suffering is a choice. Suffering, I think, is not accepting the pain in your life and continuing to resist it at all costs. Okay? That's not the same as trying to heal and remediate something. Sometimes we can only heal and remediate something when we accept that it's a part of our life. Okay? So how do we practice acceptance so that we can learn how to let go of what is no longer serving us and allow space to be reborn in a new form? How do we shed our skin, right? Yeah. Kai says compost is definitely the magic of death. Absolutely. And you know what's interesting about both Taurus and Scorpio periods, Kai? The microbes in the soil heat up at both times. They get active. One is the fructification energy in Taurus, where it's ready to support life. The other is heating up to support the breakdown of life. It's the other face of the same process. Yeah, that's a good analogy, Mistel. We can learn so much from nature, right? Nature is a great teacher. Thomas, nice to see you. Namaste, says Thomas. Nice to see you here, friends. Yeah, I know we've been starting early for my West Coast friends, but we've been trying to avoid a little bit some of the starting with Mars in the first house. We probably will shift back to an afternoon time in a little bit because Mars is coming off of the ascendant, and we will try to do it the other direction. So anticipate that in the next few weeks. It will probably go back to maybe a 1 or 2 o'clock Eastern time again. But I'm not trying to be confusing. I'm just trying to create the best possible conditions for our show here. Okay. So the other part of this Scorpio 3 is we have a fixed star here called Unukalhai. Excuse me. Here we have a slide about Kairos. You can find this in my Decans of Scorpio webinar, which is for sale on my website, spencermichaud.com. And Unukalhai is in the constellation Serpens here, right? And it is the core Serpens. It is the neck or the heart of the snake. And this is the serpent in the hands of Ophiuchus, aka Asclepius, the healer, right? He's wrestling with this great snake. So we may be wrestling with our attachments to our desires, to our dreams. Some of our dreams are possible to manifest, some are not. And this is important as we transition from Saturn in Pisces 3 to Saturn in Aries. There are going to be some dreams we have to let go of. Okay, some are coming to fruition. Some say, no, that one's not for you at this time. Intrigue, poisons, accidents, and violence sometimes can be associated with this fixed star. Good to know, because we have Uranus on another fixed star that's associated with some of these types of things. Unukalhai can teach us how to shed our skin. It can teach us to take fresh form, to avoid stagnating, to avoid hastening death in another part of our life by not letting go of the part that's not serving us. So flexibility is important with this fixed star and with this decan. You know, you hold on too tightly to something to try to keep a form alive that is obviously passing away. That can lead to loss in a portion of life that you didn't need to have loss in, right? You can think of all sorts of situations like this. Let's say that you're in a job that you don't love, that obviously is not right for you, that you're being asked to work too many hours, that you don't like your boss, the culture is toxic, but you're just determined to make it work. And you work extra hours, you work overtime, you're just burning yourself out completely to make this untenable situation work. And what that does is that destroys your relationship at home. See what I'm saying? by trying to keep that job that doesn't work for you anymore. It could be destroying something that could be providing good for you if you would let the job go. The reverse can be true. You may have a terrible relationship in your life that's obviously over, but you're trying to keep it alive and it affects your work life. And it may be making it difficult for you to do your work. There's all sorts of situations like this. So staying flexible can help protect something in our life that is obviously still vital by removing a portion or a piece of it without the whole thing, right? This is true also for, I had a jade plant that is probably, oh my gosh, it's probably almost 20 years old now. And I had fertilized it with this like fish fertilizer, and it didn't like it. And it was really rotting out. It's a big plant too. It's the trunk is probably 4 inches around, and it was rotting terribly. And I was super sad because it was very old and very sacred to me. And what I had to do is I had to cut away a huge portion that was rotting and then spray it down with an antifungal, like a copper antifungal solution, and then see what happened. And lo and behold, after I got rid of the rot, the rest of it started to grow again. And now it's completely healthy once again. So being able to cut away the parts that are toxic, that are no longer working, sometimes can save something that's important to you. So keep that in mind as well. It's all about balance, friends. So if we go back to our chart, we're going to talk about Mars here. We're going to talk about the host, Mars. Do me a favor, friends. Please, if you haven't already, please like the video. It's a real simple thing that can help improve the algorithm for our videos and bring new people into the community, and really helps support me in what I do. If you're not subscribed, if you're new here, please subscribe. They'll help you know when we're going live again. And sometimes the time changes a little bit. So by subscribing, you'll know exactly when we're going live so you don't miss anything. Turn on that notification bell and sign up for the email. Make sure you stretch, right? If you're interested in making a donation today, you can with a little super chat. That is always appreciated as well. But I'm just happy that you're here with me today. I love all the comments. That interaction also helps the channel. So thank you so much for being here and participating. All right, get a drink of water, and we'll keep unfolding this. I've got water today. I've got some tea. I've got some ashwagandha, clementine, stress support, yogi tea. I love it. Helps calm my mind before I do these things. Sometimes I get, sometimes before I have a public appearance, I'll get a little bit of anxiety about it. But this tea actually is really helping me calm my brain down. And it's really been useful. So let's talk a little bit about the host of this full moon, of the moon itself. That's Mars. And it's going to be making a square to the moon from Leo 2. Now, Leo 2 is a decan that's associated with the 6 of Wands. And that card is generally viewed as very positive, right? It shows a figure that is returning home from battle successfully and with his community. So this can be a celebration of the victory of authenticity, okay? But when we have Mars here, sometimes that can, here's the card in question. Sorry, you can see it in the little box on the side here. So the card is called the Lord of Victory, a crown of laurels, Austin Coppock calls it. That decan to me often represents acknowledgement for who we are and what we've done. And one of the challenges when we have a malefic planet, Mars, Saturn, etc., in this decan, is sometimes we don't get acknowledgement for who we are, for what we've done. We don't always get the flowers. We don't always get the parade. And that may be another thing to consider with this full moon, is we may be wanting and desiring validation for the projects that we've been doing, for who we've become. And that may be not as easy to come by, with Mars sort of creating conflict over that. So how do we work through that? I mean, to me, this is a question of how do we do the work that we need to do and release attachment to the outcomes and to the applause. Speaking as a Leo ascendant, there have been many times in my life where I have been desiring of either attention, applause, or mostly validation. Part of it comes from the trauma of being a child of divorce and having a period of time where I had an absent parent in my very young age. Lost my mom for a few years when I was about 4 years old. She kind of had her own mental health challenges she was dealing with, and we reunited when I was about 6. But those types of things can lead to a desire for validation due to trauma. And with Mars here, we may be having to deal with our own sense of whether we are accepted for who we are. To me, real authenticity is, does our inner experience match our external expression? And you are in control of that, whether someone approves of it or not. So I think that my advice for this is that, hey, if you can look yourself in the mirror at the end of the day and said, you know what, I did the best that I could with the resources, the time, the knowledge, and the energy that I had in the moment, then I can sleep at night. And maybe the results aren't exactly what you expected or what other people expect, but you have to answer that question for yourself rather than trying to measure it by someone else's expectations. I'll tell you, I've been listening a lot in the last week or so to Shannon Hoon. I don't know if you all are familiar with Shannon Hoon. He was the lead singer of Blind Melon, a band from the 90s. You're probably familiar with his one big hit, No Rain, right? But he's an interesting character to me. I just kind of came across him randomly and started going on a deep dive. Sometimes when I get interested in a musician or in anything really, I start to kind of try to absorb its essence and get to the real core of what it's all about. And Shannon Hoon, of course, died of a cocaine overdose at age 28, 3 months or so after having his first child, which is super tragic. But just hearing interviews with him and hearing his perspective, he was struggling, I think, with the expectations of having a hit single and the follow-up recording and what people expected him to be versus what he was wanting to be as a new father, the expectations that he had of touring and of a record company's expectation of supporting a record by going out and touring relentlessly. He was also struggling with his own challenges with addiction. He had gotten very sober at the birth of his daughter, and then he had sort of a relapse. They were recording in New Orleans, and he kind of, that's a place that I've heard, and he said is very difficult to resist temptation. And he had kind of an all-night kind of experience with some drugs, and his heart just kind of couldn't take it. And probably the humidity and heat didn't do him any favors, and he expired. But it's really been kind of showing me his authenticity, though. Just listening to him talk, listening to where he came from, a small town, Lafayette, Indiana, same town that Axl Rose came from. And they, of course, collaborated when Shannon Hoon went out to Los Angeles on the album Use Your Illusion and the song Don't Cry. You can hear Shannon Hoon in the background there. But you can hear him wrestling with who he is internally versus who he's expected to be. And I just loved hearing him talk about how moving to a place like Los Angeles really expanded his horizons, helped show him how some of his preconceived notions about who he was an athlete as a high school person, kind of a jock, surprisingly enough. That band is very different than that one single. One single is very kind of like an anthem for neo-hippie culture in the mid-90s, but that band has a lot of diverse influences and grunge elements to it and things of that nature. But he really had his mind expanded, and it helped him become a different person. And I think that this is a reflection of Mars in Leo, is how do we unite the disparate parts of ourselves, our inner experience of who we are and our external expression. And part of what we need to potentially let go of with this full moon is an attachment to an old identity, an attachment to some way of being externally, some skin, some snake skin that is no longer a reflection of who we are on the inside. If Shannon Hoon had maybe figured that out a little bit sooner, that maybe what truly might have made him happy was being at home with his daughter and his girlfriend, he might still be with us here today. He wasn't trying to be something that he didn't feel in alignment with. Okay? So that's an important thing to recognize, is that sometimes by letting go of an old persona that doesn't serve us anymore, that can help breathe life into the more authentic parts of ourself. But you have to be willing to let go of the old self. Even if at one point that old self expression, that old external self expression brought you success. That's actually part of the real key, is it's become so much more seductive when we've actually had success with a certain way of being in the past. But inevitably, when we change, our expression has to change with it. When our inner experience and desires and values change, we have to change our external lives to match that, or we become very unhappy. And then that can lead to experiences like we had with Shannon Hoon potentially. Now, I'm making a fair amount of conjecture, but I've listened to a lot of his interviews. He has a wonderful documentary. It's called All I Can Say, that I recommend, because he did something somewhat unique for the 90s, and it's not unique today, but he held a camcorder and basically recorded the last like 5 years of his life, the ups and the downs, the positives and negatives. It was like we got an Instagram reel for him every 5 minutes, when that thing didn't exist. So how do we become our most authentic selves? And how do we shed that old persona in the process? Jennifer says, that hits home. My grandfather had half of his leg amputated because of gangrene in his toe. Oh my goodness, that's horrible, Jennifer. But a good example, right? Jennifer says it gave him almost 20 extra years because he was able to let go of a piece of himself that was no longer vital without glamorizing it. It bought him more time, and it allowed him to thrive. Yeah, great example. Taku says, wonderful advice on authenticity. Thank you, Spencer. Thank you, Taku. And thank you for being here, friend. Hope that you're doing well over there, I believe, in Germany. Yeah. Authenticity is a hard thing to capture sometimes. Part of it is because there's so much pressure to be something that we're not in these societies, especially in Western late-stage capitalism. On the internet, for example, there's so much noise that sometimes it forces us to be something that we don't always resonate with. I will say, during my time as a professional musician, I loved music. I loved making music. I loved playing music. I didn't love all of the things that went into going out and performing a gig. I was totally fine when I got up on stage for the most part, but I didn't like the moving all the heavy equipment, sitting around waiting for the gig to start, being in an environment that was noisy, loud, dealing with indifference when you're pouring your heart out to people, dealing with drunks, dealing with smoke, dealing with all of that, dealing with not sleeping in your own bed. All of that did not work for me. And this is something that you'll have to consider. Well, what is authentically you? You know, all of that was the business side of things that I just didn't resonate with. Some people love some of that. Some people love seeing a new town every day. It just didn't resonate with me. So I've changed, you know? And here's the other thing too, it really makes me thinking about different choices that we make. And I'm not saying I'm any better or worse than Shannon Hoon, but I had a kid when I was 23 years old. And I made a choice to not go out on tour. I passed up a lot of opportunities to advance my career. And, you know, I'm still here, and so is she, you know, and she's an adult now, and she's grown up and having hopefully a good experience as an adult. And sometimes the small choices that we make to give up what we consider quote unquote success, they can make all the difference. Shannon Hoon's daughter grew up without a father. Mine didn't, you know? So I think this is these little choices that we make can be, I think they make all the difference. And I'm not saying that my parenting experience was perfect. There was a lot of ups and downs with it. But I think that success is measured in different ways. And that's really important to understand with Mars here in Leo too. Success is what is important to you, not what is important to the external forces that try to measure it in ways that may not be in alignment with your fate. Stella Rendition is here. What's up, Stella? Nice just popping in to say hi. I haven't been able to make many lives, but catching the recordings. I appreciate you, Spencer. I appreciate you, Stella. Thank you for popping in, and thank you for letting me know that you're here. I love it when everyone kind of says hi. It makes me feel good. I love kind of feeling that we're co-creating these live streams together. I do enjoy connecting with people and with the community and things of that nature. So it really does fill my heart up when all of you kind of say hi on the streams here. So thank you so much for popping in. Okay, so I think that's our Mars energy. I will say this, there is kind of this little helper, Venus, even though Venus is not in its most favorite position, it is making an overcoming trine to Mars. So we may be more inclined to just be ourselves because Venus is in Aries without necessarily needing someone else's approval. That to me has been a difference between Aries and Leo. Is Aries says, here I am. I don't really give a shit if you like it or not. Take it or leave it. Bye. You know, like Leo says, here I am. Love me, please. Please love me. And then eventually they grow into maybe, oh, it would be nice if you loved me, but I love myself, you know, and that's hopefully enough, right? Fun fact, Shannon Hoon has both Venus and Jupiter in Leo 3. So he had a lot of interesting Leo placements in addition to his Libra sun, and I'm going to guess Cancer moon. There could be an argument for Gemini. I don't have a time chart for him, but he seems to have a Cancer moon vibe to me. Steven says, I made interesting choices myself. I'm not a parent, but I had the choice to either have a structured life or a chaotic one. Jupiter, Saturn opposition has put a lot of balance and compromise on me. Jupiter in the 12th, Saturn in the 6th. Steven, definitely. And yeah, it doesn't just have to be a parental choice. I like how you're describing that, like the choice between having a more stable, structured life or just living in chaos. Those little choices can make all the difference, you know? And I'm not saying that one path is always better than the other. Some people thrive with a little bit more variety, chaos, unstructuredness. But other people, if you know yourself, being your most authentic self is understanding what conditions are right for you and then living your life according to those values. I mean, there are people that love being out on the road, that love traveling, and that is their authentic self. It just wasn't mine, right? And I'm not sure it was Shannon Hoon's. And that led to some choices that he made because he wasn't able to live in alignment with who he really felt he was becoming inside. From all from all interviews, it seemed like he was really excited about being a dad, that he was really just wanting to be back there with his child. And from whatever other pressures that he was experiencing, he wasn't able to do so, and that led to some disconnect. But how do we reunite those parts of ourselves? The first thing that comes through being honest with ourselves. If you can't be honest with yourselves, you can't be honest with the rest of the world. Being honest with yourself may disappoint some people in your life. That's okay. It's better to disappoint someone than to live inauthentically, in my opinion. Now, within reason, you still have to make adjustments and be a kind person. If your authentic self is an asshole, well, then you might want to try to change. You might want to try to mature. You know, so there are limits to all this, but hopefully you're getting my point. Okay, so this full moon is going to be squared Mars. It's not squared Mars in Cancer. Actually, it's squaring, it is squared Mars though. Let me fix that. So full moon is square Mars. So that could lead to some tension, right? The tension between our previous selves and who we want to become in the future. We've talked about Uranus being co-present with the sun, Uranus on Algol, which is maybe encouraging us to have innovative solutions to remediating past mistakes. Okay. Mercury co-present with the sun, square Pluto. We've talked about that. We previewed that in the beginning, but just to touch on that again, let's touch on that again here. So here we have, let's do that in blue. How about that? Here's Mercury and Pluto squaring each other. Again, Mercury in the first decan of Taurus, that is all about planning for the future, potential worry over scarcity, over lack of resources. And because it's squaring Pluto, some of that worry could be coming from an external social source, like political source, society, just the economy, etc. So because of, and this is not news to anybody who's been paying attention, because of things like tariffs, etc., there is a real potential for things to get a lot more expensive and our dollar to not go as far as it has in the past, and for real scarcity to happen. This is part of the reason my partner and I have been going so wholeheartedly into food foresting, gardening, so that we can grow some of our own food, so we're less dependent on food that might become a lot more expensive in the months and years ahead. Also, it gives us the opportunity to share with our neighbors. If we are able to grow enough, not only for ourselves, but to share with our community, that feels good too. So this might be part of this full moon too, is you might be feeling a little bit of pressure from social circumstances that are outside of your control. It could lead to a little bit of obsession about planning. I would say this, with Mercury square Pluto, it is important to get to the heart of something and get into the details and uncover the truth. I would do that to a certain degree though. There is a point where you can over prepare. Mercury square Pluto with Taurus and Aquarius, the negative side of this could be hoarding, right? Let's say you're upset about potential for the economy to change, where if things become a lot more expensive and you go out and this happened during the pandemic when everyone was afraid that there wouldn't be any toilet paper, and they just cleared the shelves of toilet paper. And then, we had one person sitting with like a mountain of toilet paper, and then other people that had none. And that can lead to discontent, violence, etc. So in my opinion, sharing and taking only as much as you need, maybe you can prepare a little bit, but taking as much as you need and leaving some for others, that actually keeps you safer than hoarding. The billionaires are about to figure this out, is if you hoard all of a community's resources, that community starts to get restless. And I mean, and that's when revolutions happen. If the billionaires would just share and just like pay their fair share of taxes and like do some philanthropic things and stop trying to screw people over, people wouldn't be as upset. They wouldn't be sowing the seeds of their own undoing. And the same is true on smaller scales. If you hoard, if you get too worried about scarcity and you start hoarding and you hoard from your neighbors, if you hoard from your community, you hoard from your family members, you are starting to plant the seed of your own undoing. If you share with them, I had a conversation with one of my neighbors the other day he's a landlord, and he has a very different viewpoint on how to prepare for scarcity. And I was like, we're going to grow some food and we're going to try to share with our neighbors and try to create community and blah, blah, blah. And, he was very skeptical of all of that. And I kind of played dumb and was like, well, I'm just a tender, soft-hearted guy, blah, blah, blah. But in my mind, I'm like, man, gentrifier. like I just looking at him like, oh boy, like you're part of the problem, but you could be part of the solution if you just stop being so afraid. It's his fear that might be leading to the very experiences that he is afraid of. And I think this is part of this Mercury Pluto square in this full moon is, how do we not call in the very thing that we're afraid of by obsessing about it, right? And by being generous with our resources rather than hoarding. All right. I've touched on the Venus-Mars trine, but I do think that this could be something that could help alleviate our need for external approval by just accepting ourselves as we are, our most authentic self. We talked a little bit about both benefics being in inversion. You could see Jupiter's on one side of the sun and moon here, and Venus is on the other. None of them are able to witness both the sun and the moon. So, which can speak to some difficulties. Venus is going to potentially help from a back channel, but other than that, there's not a lot of benefic influence in this chart. The first aspect that the full moon is going to make after it is released from the bond, released from within 15 degrees of opposition or conjunction, an important indicator of how the thing might turn out, is a trine with Venus. So that's good news. It's going to be trining Venus from 9 degrees of Sagittarius. So I think that once we understand what we need to let go of, what moment is passing, how we can become our best authentic self, how do we release old skin, old identities that aren't serving us, we can start to take action and live out our truth. I think that that's part of what this is suggesting, is once we let go of stuff, then it's full steam ahead, right? So when we see how this is going to unfold, and I'm going to do this on the outer chart. So the outer chart is how the transits are unfolding. The inner chart is just going to be the full moon itself. If we look to the 16th, you're going to have Mercury here emerging from under the beams. So that is usually a very important moment of phasis, where we're getting, not emerging. It's going into the beams. It's going under the sun's beams. So it's an important moment of phasis. Both emerging and going into the beams is an important omen that is speaking. So this is a direct Mercury visiting Olympus. So Hermes going to the mountain of the gods, receiving a message from the divine that we'll get that divine download when we get to the Mercury Cazimi in Gemini in the end of the month. So pay attention to what happens when you have Mercury going under the beams, 11 degrees or so of Taurus, in a decan associated with sharing and with creating a routine that is sustainable. So you may get a message about how you can share with your community, how you can become more authentic. Now it's going to be going into under the beams with a square to Mars here. So you may have to shift your identity. If your identity has been one of like self-centeredness and, well, might makes right and I'm going to get mine, well, you might have to release that if you want to succeed moving forward. You may have to learn how to work with your neighbors. You may have to learn to work with people in your community for mutual flourishing rather than just selfish flourishing. So as we move forward off of that, the Sun conjoins Uranus on the 17th. So here you see the Sun conjoining Uranus, where you might have an unexpected bolt of awareness. And I think Sun-Uranus conjunctions often gives us interesting ideas. And this could be some really important ideas about how to fix something that has fallen into disrepair. You know, that's when the Mercury-Mars square is kind of perfecting as well. So be very careful about how you communicate your desires with others around this period of time too, because Uranus can lead to feelings of wanting to shake up the apple cart, so to speak. And Mercury square Mars can lead to some conversations that are a little bit spicy. Okay. So keep that in mind. So as we move forward here, we're going to go through this kind of quickly. You can get a more in-depth deep dive in the astrology of May if you want to watch that replay. But here on the 18th, that's when we have Mercury squaring Mars, starting to separate as we get into the evening. Okay, so let's go a few hours back. So here it's still squaring here in the early portion of the day. And Jupiter will be square the nodes. That to me is a pivotal turning point as well. So here's Jupiter at 25 degrees of Gemini at the bending of the nodes. So the north node is in Pisces, 25 Pisces, and the south node is at 25 Virgo. And this is sort of a peak of the north node cycle of Jupiter, in my opinion. The peak of the dream, you know, the what are we willing to sacrifice for the dream, the wild swings of emotions. And then we're starting to move towards, so that's a period of increase, a peak of increase. Now we see Jupiter start moving towards the south node, a period of decrease in a decan associated with legacy. And we may have to start shifting our expectations about what we are passing on, about our legacies, about the wealth creation, etc., especially as we prepare for Jupiter moving into Cancer. Jupiter is about to improve its condition significantly, but this decan of Gemini that Jupiter is in says you can't keep every project afloat. To be able to pass on the legacy that you want to, you're going to have to make a choice. One twin has to be let go of, one project, one facet has to die so that the other can live. I can already see this in my future. I'm probably going to have to really scale back my vegetable garden this year so that we can get the trees in. Like the trees are already going, they're already, all the sites prepped. That's going to have to be priority number one because those trees are here, they're alive. If we don't get them in the ground, they'll die. They won't do as well as they could do. The vegetable garden hasn't even been planted. There's no seed started, there's no nothing. So there's still a choice to say, you know what, I want to do that, but I might not be able to do everything that I want to do this year for that purpose. You see what I'm saying? So think about that. You may have a choice to make, especially around the 18th, which is that's probably the stickiest part of this potentially. Tarya says, when will the Sun conjunct Uranus be the last that happens in Taurus? I think it's probably this one. Uranus is going to move into Gemini in July on my birthday. So we can make sure here. Sun conjoin Uranus. So here's the next one in Gemini on May 22nd, 2026. The one after that, still in Gemini. So this is the last one that we have in Taurus. Okay. Probably important. You know, really listen to any ideas you have about remediating a past mistake, especially if it is regarding humility in the face of nature. I would say that my Taurus 3 energy, remediating mistakes. It's not even always my own mistakes. We've been remediating the mistakes of owners of this property for decades. We've had people that have been dumping garbage and rocks and cement in this corner of the property for decades. We pulled out trash, we pulled out shit. It was a terrible dumping ground. We've pulled out invasive vines that have been untamed or untended for decades, and trying to create a beautiful habitat, not only for our own flourishing, but for our community and for the animals and insects and birds that we share this land with. That to me is very Taurus, doing Taurus 3 well, in my opinion. Making up for the mistakes of the past and having ideas towards doing so. Yeah, Taku says, yep, next time will be in Gemini in 2026. Absolutely. So there's our Mercury-Mars square, Jupiter square the nodes. Could be a sticky day on the 18th. So put all your patient hats on. Try to communicate with grace. Try not to let the electricity that's going through you with the Uranus-Sun conjunction come out in negative ways. I've witnessed this firsthand when I have been working with my partner. Sometimes to go out and do this Mars-related work. I have Mars Time Lord. She had Mars Time Lord earlier. We would kind of Mars ourselves out. We'd put a bunch of Mars and Capricorn oil on, or also this Antares oil that comes from Sphere and Sundry. They have a really good badger oil that helps you dig. It's for digging and for immune to poisons, because there's poison ivy and all sorts of bullshit out there. But before we would even get outside, we'd start to have an argument. It was just too much Mars. And then in the middle of it, we'd be like, what are we doing? We're just marinating in Mars energy. Let's go utilize this towards the project, not at each other, right? So same thing on a day like this. If you have Mercury, Mars square, Jupiter square the nodes, try not to take it out on your loved ones. Do something with it. Get active with it. Recognize that your communication might be a little bit more aggressive than it needs to be. Maybe because of conversations over sharing with others and appreciation. That's one thing I could see with this Mercury-Mars squares. You may have been thinking that you were, I've been sharing this particular resource with someone and they don't appreciate me. Well, sometimes someone doesn't always know how to express that, and letting go of the need for all this validation for everything you're doing is probably important. That leads us to the last quarter moon on the 20th, which is also the day that the sun moves into Gemini. So we've got the sun moving into Gemini. Okay, here. As well as the last quarter moon. And we have a malefic enclosure beginning of Jupiter and Mercury for a couple days. So let's talk about this last quarter moon briefly first. This is going to be, let's go back and so you can see it exactly. There it is. Moon at about 29 degrees of Aquarius, squaring the sun in Taurus. So this is both of these planets at the anaretic degree, the last degrees of each sign, in bounds that are difficult. This could be the moment after you've realized that the form is no longer tenable, that you finally are just like, I gotta go. I can't keep doing this. I can't hold my ground any longer in this situation, right? Aquarius 3, they call it unstable effort, but you see a figure in the Seven of Swords of someone sneaking off into the night. I associate this decan with the frustration that bubbles up that finally says, I've had enough. I gotta go, So this could be the moment where you're like, that's enough. I'm done. Let's move on. And then the energy shifts. The energy is going to shift over the moon's going to move into Pisces, and then the sun's going to move into Gemini, right? And when the sun moves into Gemini, it begins this malefic enclosure. And this malefic enclosure, you're really seeing here, unless I've got my facts wrong here, and I don't think that I do, but here we have, it's a double weird one. It's like So you've got Saturn making its ray, casting its ray on this side of Mercury, Mars casting its ray on this side of Mercury, with none of these other planets breaking it up. Okay. You could argue Uranus, but there's debate as to whether the outer planet can break up a malefic enclosure. So those two planets are casting their ray on each side of Mercury. And then let's do a different color here. Then we've got Jupiter here with Mars casting its ray on one side of Jupiter and Saturn casting its ray on the other side of Jupiter. So this is like a dually enclosed by different aspect rays. Now, that may lead to a couple difficult days. You know, you've got the Mercury-Mars square, the 18th, and then you've got this malefic enclosure until the 22nd for Jupiter, and then the 24th for Mercury. The Jupiter enclosure ends at with the Venus-Mars trine, and then the Mercury malefic enclosure ends when Saturn moves into Aries. So in addition to all that, you've got the Sun squaring Pluto on the 23rd. So I'll get rid of all this. So that could be another factor that could be leading to some of the tension that we're experiencing. So here's a Sun Pluto trine. Sorry, I've got a square here, but it's a trine. Apologies. Maybe I rushed something and I've had to remediate this mistake. So you may have an awareness of some of the social challenges, and that could be leading to a little bit of paralysis by analysis. Probably not as bad with the Sun trining Pluto, obviously, than if it was square. But that first decan of Gemini talks about an awareness of so many options that you have difficulty moving in a particular direction. When we get to the 22nd here, okay, here we're going to go back a day. Sorry if it's a little bit out of order. But here's the Venus-Mars trine. And because Venus is now trining Mars, it is breaking up the malefic enclosure with its aspect ray. Okay, so it is casting its ray. Okay, it's breaking up the malefic enclosure of Jupiter by casting its ray here. And it is kind of blocking the ray of Mars. Does that make sense? I know it's kind of a little bit of like a challenging concept, but malefic enclosure can be bodily by having the planet right immediately on either side of a planet, or by casting its aspect ray on each sign. And when another planet is casting its ray in between where these two planets are, it is kind of alleviating that. So that's what's happening here to break that one up. When we have Saturn moving into Aries on the 24th, that starts to break up the 1-2 Mercury, because now it's not casting its ray on either side. Now it's in aversion to Mercury. Okay. And then it doesn't matter when Mercury moves into Gemini, because then the Sun is breaking it up as well. And we'll talk about Saturn and Aries more next week, but that's a pretty big shift to Saturn and Aries into its fall, bound to the ideals of independence, rejection of that which we are not, which can lead to all sorts of challenging circumstances. We'll talk about that in depth. I don't want to spend too much time on that here. So Steven's mom's birthday is on May 20th. Happy birthday to your mom. 85. Oh, goodness. My mom's birthday is on the Mercury Cazimi this year. Unfortunately, she already passed, but she would have been 66 this year. Happy heavenly birthday to my mom, and happy earthly birthday to yours. So we have Mercury moving into Gemini on the 25th. So you can see here Mercury moving into Gemini on the 25th here. That is generally a pretty good place for Mercury. Okay, one where it is starting to get very close to its Cazimi. It is in its own home domicile. Our brains could start working better at this point. Really powerful moment for Mercury as it comes together with the Sun. That brings us to our new moon on the 6th of this full moon cycle. So here is the new moon, 6 degrees of Gemini, Mercury co-present, Jupiter co-present. So its host is there, a benefic is there, it's making a sextile to Mars, it's not getting a negative aspect from Saturn. This one looks pretty good, right? You got another sextile here from another benefic planet. There's no real huge red flags in the new moon in Gemini. So if you're struggling with this full moon, things hopefully will start to improve by this new moon in Gemini. And then finally, that brings us to our cazimi of Mercury on the 30th. So here is Mercury and the Sun coming together, generally about 9 degrees. It says 8 here, but this is the day before it does. So this is really a renewal of Mercury in the heart of the Sun. And it is burning away all the old cycles of Mercury and bringing us a download of information, metaphorically, like from Zeus on Olympus, right? Mercury was a messenger, and he's receiving a new message from an external source, a higher power at this cazimi. When we have retrograde cazimis, it's like Mercury going into the underworld where we're uncovering something, some knowledge that we've had within ourselves. This cazimi cycle, I think, generally represents getting a download of information from a higher power. So pay attention on the 30th as to the messages that you receive. So friends, that's what I've got for the astrology of this full moon and the subsequent unfolding. Let's talk about an I-Ching and an animal here. Jennifer's got a birthday for her mom on the 31st, right? So we'll celebrate all our mom's birthdays. Make sure you subscribe. We're going to take a look at the I-Ching here. And I asked, what is the essence of the full moon in Scorpio 3 in 2025? And we've got the hexagram, which translates to retreat. Okay, you don't need to see my face too closely there, sorry. So we have retreat, strategic withdrawal, living to fight another day. You know, sometimes when we're trying to pursue something too intensely, we burn ourselves out. This is saying, hey, take a step back. You know, there's a hostile condition with a Mars square there. Make a strategic retreat. And this is not giving up completely. This is saying, well, maybe this isn't going to work out right now, but you can still maybe revisit this later. I'm telling myself this in advance as I'm getting a little disappointed. I haven't been able to do as many vegetable gardening things with all the trees that are going in, but maybe making a strategic retreat will help me to have a future flourishing. Does that make sense? So it's about conserving your resources, conserving your energy. And there's one changing line in this, and it's at the top, it says, cheerful retreat. There is nothing for which this is not beneficial. I'm going to quote Jack M. Balkin from his wonderful book, The Laws of Change. It says, the happiest retreat comes when you have emotionally prepared yourself for it. You have become sufficiently removed from the situation that you can judge matters objectively. Because you know that the time has come to leave, you can happily go your own way. The word translates as cheerful in the text. It also means with abundant resources. These resources are not just material, they are also emotional. When you have made peace with yourself and your decision, you are well prepared for whatever lies ahead. Sounds a lot like Mars in the second decan of Leo, doesn't it? Right? Like making peace with yourself and your authenticity. He also goes on to say, if you do not allow yourself to be hampered by bitterness, regret, or self-doubt, you will travel smoothly from the old situation to a new one, instinctively following the correct path. Such clarity of mind inevitably brings good fortune and success in whatever you do. I love that. It's, shed your skin. Do it gracefully. Don't hold on too tightly to the old thing. Just go with the flow. That will lead to the hexagram number 31, mutual influence, reciprocity, mutual attraction, courtship, wooing. This is about working in harmony with others, about being attracted to something new, right? So by letting go of the old form, by working in harmony with others, in harmony with nature, in harmony with timing, that will lead to a mutual flourishing, okay? It doesn't come from being selfish. It doesn't come from hanging on too tightly to an old persona, to an old relationship, to an old dream. It's about being in the here and the now and doing from a place of mutual flourishing. That brings us to our animal here. So our animal is the frog. And look at our little frog here. Look at him with his little hands all folded. He's being so polite. He's like, hello. So frog is a really interesting animal. A frog is often associated with rain and with purification and the rains that come and purify the old toxic situation. It talks about using your voice to sing your authentic song. It talks about being able to leap at opportunities or leap out of the way of a predator. So if you are in a situation where you're like, I have to kind of leap out of the way of this, I need to let go of this situation, frog can help you to do so. They're cute little creatures here. We've got a little green tree frog. Let's see if there's anything else that we need. Adaptability, change, survival, right? Powerfully being able to escape danger. It also helps us release negative emotions. Sometimes we have to feel our feelings and release some things that have gotten in the way that are making us feel stuck. So how do we release our emotions in a way that is healthy rather than in a negative way? How do we do so in a way that can heal rather than destroy? Scorpio is a sign that can be very, very healing if we utilize it correctly. It can also be extremely destructive if we're not conscious and aware of our actions. So that is what I've got for you today. Hopefully you'll have an excellent full moon coming up. Thank you so much for being here today. Yes, Rachel says the sweet frog. Yes, he's a little cutie, isn't he? It's not easy being green, but he's got it under control there. Oh, hopefully we make a rainbow connection this full moon. But I digress for those of you who aren't Kermit the Frog fans. All right, friends, that's what I've got for you today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. You can find me on social media over at Spencer Michaud on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, Twitter, etc. Go follow me over on those spaces. Go check out spencermichaud.com if you want to book a reading. If you want to sign up for a class, if you want to sign up for Dignity and Devotion, the Jupiter series, or the Saturn one that comes afterwards, sign up for the newsletter. Go check out Tanya's stuff on Etsy at Third Coast Mojo. And yeah, do me a huge favor. If you haven't yet, please like the video, subscribe, and we'll be back next week. I think we'll see if we can tackle Saturn and Aries. I think that'll be really interesting. Hopefully we'll have some positive takeaways and prepare ourselves for a really interesting transit. So thank you, friends. Thank you for stopping by today. And we'll see you next week, friends. Peace.